Mr. Rudd. And so if we can give a big round of applause, he's going to say a few words about this program.
Thank you, Trent. And my day began, in fact, with a breakfast for White Ribbon Day, which I've been privileged to be an ambassador for about a decade. I acknowledge my senatorial colleague, Senator Mark Fern. Mark will, brave man that he is, lead the swearing of the pledge up at Australia's Zoo on Sunday. Not with the crocs, not with the roos, but with real live human males. He's doing a great job, and I know he's been passionately committed to this cause for a long time. You've had an extraordinary array of talent before you. Paul Scurra, known in our business as Paul the Fat Controller Scurra, because he skinny controller Scurra, because he controls train networks. We also have Paul the Mayor Antonio. Paul, congratulations for all the work you're doing up there in the Garden City. Bob the Commissioner Atkinson. Commissioner Bob, in our hearts, mate, you're always going to be the Commissioner, so just get used to it. I mean that. We also have Rob, I'm sorry about Movember Reed. Is that purely cultivated for Movember? Yes. When's December? Well done, mate. 110 kilometres. Scott the Cisco Kid, where are you? Well done. Terrific stuff with the IT industry. And Dave, man who takes after my own heart, the Body Richter. Where are you, Dave? I've lost you. There you go, mate. Yeah, there's some dumbbells out the side there. Just been using them before I came in. And our MC for this evening, Trent Dalton. Trent, I thought in his introductory remarks tonight, spoke with an eloquence on this subject I have rarely heard before. And I don't often say pleasant things about journalists. But I do say them more often than journalists say pleasant things about me.
Fair enough.
But what he said was evocative. What he said was he could see domestic violence unfolding as he walked up the street through the open windows of a housing commission estate. That he could hear fists going into walls and fists being planted into the faces of women. And that while I correctly described this some years ago as the great silent crime of our times, in reality there is nothing silent about the acts of domestic violence themselves. So Trent, if Queensland newspapers haven't rendered into print what you said here this evening, I would encourage you to have it so printed. By the way, he said as a consequence of his engagement with his cause that he subsequently won a Walkley and his career went through the roof. I just draw to your attention the fact that when he was first allegedly inspired by my remarks on this subject, I was then Prime Minister. When I was here last year at this event for the first time, I was Foreign Minister. And now, well, I'm not quite sure what I am. I'm a Member of Parliament. But I have a degree of anxiety about next year. In terms of there is nothing permanent about domestic violence. If we have a view that it is, then we have lost this fight before it has begun. Cast our mind back a couple of hundred years, when it was regarded as perfectly normal and natural for each of us, so long as we were white, to own slaves somewhere in the world. And that was the human condition for the previous 2 to 3 millennia, until we decided, eventually, and in some places involving the taking up of arms, that this was no longer the right and decent thing to do. Much more recently, we have regarded it as right, normal and proper to vilify and to discriminate against people on the grounds of their sexuality. This, again, had rolled on for millennia. And only recently have we worked out, as a society of people in this country, and regrettably still not in all countries of the world, that this too should be consigned to history. So too, we should have this attitude and this perspective when we approach the challenge of domestic violence in this country and around the world. We in this country are members of a great human parish called the international community. And we concentrate legitimately on what we can do in this country and among our own, the leadership roles which can be performed within it. But of the 7 billion people alive on this planet this evening, women in every one of those cultures and civilizations are experiencing the same, and in some cases, much worse. It's a challenge for our 23 million. The statistic is a haunting one in 3. It's a challenge for the human family. It's one of the reasons why last year I appointed Australia's first ever ambassador for women and girls. Penny Williams has one primary remit around the world, and that is to get the message out from this country through our international aid and development program to developing countries in our region, in Melanesia, in Micronesia, in Polynesia, in the Islamic world, in the Arab world, and across Africa and across Asia and into China, that this is a universal right for women to be free from the fear of violence. The work has just begun. I often hear it said, quietly, subtly, sometimes in an inquiring way, and sometimes in a genuinely inquiring way, whether the male of the species is somehow programmed for violence. Let us go to this subject, because it goes to the heart of what we can do about it. It is good that we raise consciousness about the appalling physical phenomenon called violence against women. It's important that we shame men who do it. It is important that we establish an agreed, not just legal, but social norm that this is unacceptable everywhere and at all times. But let us for a moment step inside the chemistry of a man's mind. It's an important subject. I am no expert. My only qualification here is that I'm a man and I speak with other men. I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a neuroscientist. I'm not a student of genetics. But when I look around the world and I look at my own growing up in rural Queensland, I do not see any sustainable evidence that men who turn to violence are genetically programmed to do so. What I do see is men inclined to violence because they are socialized into it by the standards often unspoken in the groups of men and the societies of men in which they grow and mature. This is an important point, because if we all think that somehow blokes, because they take up arms in wars in history and still today dominate our armed forces, or it's blokes we go and watch thump each other on the rugby field, that somehow men are somehow preconditioned by their genetic makeup to be violent. And if we think that's the case, then frankly, we're pushing it all uphill. I do not see in anything that I have read, or anything that I have experienced, or any sustainable set of surveys in communities which have men who grow up in comparable family environments, any sustainable evidence for that. So that brings it back to men being ambassadors to other men and how young men are socialised. And I think it was, in fact, the Cisco Kid before who said that his primary motivation was his 3 young boys. I have 2 myself. Not young anymore, one married, and one who's 18 going on 38. And I think about this a lot. There is no alternative for us in helping in the way in which we do the raising of young men in this country to be a 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week example to young men and to boys growing up. Because, as you know, kids take in everything. It's impossible to deliver a lecture about going to bed on time when the kid wakes up at 2 o'clock in the morning to go to the bathroom and discover that you're sitting up doing something else. They observe everything. They're the best barometers of human hypocrisy, which God ever put breath into. And so it is on this most sensitive of subjects as well. I think one of the things that we as men can help teach our sons, and where possible, more broadly, in communities where young boys and young men gather, is this. Understand, guys, what it is to navigate your own feelings. Blokes are hopeless as a genus in navigating, understanding, and responding to how they feel. For them, it is like listening to modern Arabic. I was going to say modern Chinese. Because my experience of the other gender is that through different forms of socialisation, frankly, women on balance are much better at this than we are. Quilting is one huge excuse for women to talk about their feelings one to another. Book clubs are one huge national scam for women to talk about their feelings to one another. And for blokes, where do we talk about our feelings to each other? No, we don't. At the pub, the object is to get blotto as quickly as possible. And as a consequence, actually, men don't talk about their feelings at all. For all sorts of reasons. Fear for their sexuality and its identity, fear for a whole range of factors, fear that they may be exposing something weak in their own lives. Well, guys, men, members of my gender group, that's all the above, by the way, we have to do much better at this. Understanding how we feel, why we feel a particular way, giving expression to how we feel and to why we feel, navigating the reasons for it and what we can do about it, so that when we, like any other human being, experience conflicting feelings on a given day, then we have a range of possible and civilised responses, rather than going the biff. So I offer that not as a educator, not as a neuroscientist, not as a psychologist and not as a psychiatrist, but just as a bloke who's been around a bit. And we might just begin to make substantial progress at the other end of this challenge. It's critical that we men hold an absolute standard that no violence is acceptable against women, against children, at any time, in any place. That's absolute. That is given. In fact, I was reflecting before on what Mayor Paul Antonio said in Toowoomba, and I thought when he spoke about the need not to be silent, that in fact if you wanted to render that, Paul, next year into your sloganeering up there, no silence about domestic violence. You've got to get these folk thinking about things that actually expressly rhyme. So the standards are absolute. Not being silent is absolute. But let's also do a bit of work on what goes on in the heads of guys as well. And that's where guys actually have a responsibility to help themselves and to help the others. So CEO challenge types, congratulations for all that you have done. Congratulations for the cash that you have raised. May you earn and give more cash next year as well. And if it inspires any of you to dig deeper next year, I want a solemn pledge tonight, swearing a pledge that Rob Reid will not participate in Movember. Folks, I I'm due at a school to present awards to a bunch of young boys this evening, and I must leave now. So for administering the pledge this evening, unless you wish me to do it now, can I actually delegate to my friend, good friend, and parliamentary colleague, Senator Mark Furner, to do it in my place. I thank you for your attention.
The Honourable Kevin Rudd, thank you so much. What a speech. Talk about evocative. That's fantastic. That was so wonderful. Thank you very much. Well, guys, we're going to take a proper break now, about 10 minutes, so really enjoy yourselves and relax, and think about the raffles and think about the betting, and have a great time. Thank you.